The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
My screen up now?
Looks good.
All right, let's give this a try. Interrupt me earlier if it's not working. So back to our topic of how to do market research more effectively. I know our virtual peer groups were discussing this and the various mechanisms that we have at our disposal, from the more formal RFI, request for information. We talked about that. We also talked about some of the informal sleuthing we can do, the internet searches, the looking for inspiration, let's say, from other RFPs who have gone before us, and things of that nature. So we'll jump right into the idea here of what we'd recommend. So part of the thing that we discussed in our breakout group when it comes to market research is, when are you doing this? You're usually doing this for those types of projects where putting together your statement of work and gathering your requirements and putting together your scope, it's more challenging because we may not be familiar, we haven't done this in a while, right? So you've got those projects that pop up where we've never done it before. That happens a lot in IT. We're unsure of what to include in our statement of work. We're unsure of what information the vendors will need. We're unsure of if vendors can do everything or if we need to break things apart for them into different scope areas. So all of these are big questions. And so market research is a great idea when your statement of work confidence index is low. So when you have lots of these questions about your statement of work, that's usually the time you're going to be looking at some type of market research. And I'll mention that this is usually done ahead of time, right? It's something we talked about in the IT virtual discussion group of sometimes your internal clients want to rush to RFP and get things out, and you're sitting at a pre-bid meeting and then questions can pop up from vendors, and it's all stuff that could have been ideally handled ahead of time, and market research is one way to get that done. So here's our simple solution when you're in those scenarios where you've got all those questions or your statement of work confidence index is low. And this specific tool we're going to talk about comes from our friends over at Simplar today, something that they've developed over their years of research. And here's our answer. It's the rocket science. Just ask your suppliers. that's the answer. But there's some nuance in how to approach this, right? Because unfortunately, the mind reading device here has not quite been invented yet. It'd be nice if we could just go to our suppliers and get them into that room and suck out all their knowledge. One thing our group talked about in the breakout rooms is that you can get to a pre-bid meeting, for example, and everyone clams up and doesn't want to ask questions, doesn't want to give you feedback on your scope. So it'd be really nice if we could just read everyone's minds. But until the day that is invented, we need some other mechanism by which we can get some good feedback to help guide our statements of work and our RFPs. And so the specific tool that the folks at Simplar have come up with is this. We call it a request for needs, or an RFN for short, and we'll explain why we use that acronym. At first, it may sound a little bit like an RFI, request for information, but the reason we made up this acronym, and yes, we made it up. If you've never heard of an RFN before, it's because we simply made it up. You get to do things like that in procurement. That's why I like it. And we did it specifically to differentiate it from an RFI. So what is an RFN? It is informal. So something we talked about in our group with RFIs is you're not usually requiring vendors to do it, right? And so if someone doesn't respond to your RFI, you're not going to preclude them usually from responding to your RFP down the road. Same thing here. It's informal, it's voluntary, but we're going to do it to conduct some market research in a very targeted fashion. We want to gather feedback and advice from our supplier community. That's really who we're going to. This is not going into Google lands, which is another tool, right? But has its risks. We're not going into looking for past RFPs. This is going straight to the supplier community to have them help us define the next steps and answer the questions that we have. And the real goal of the RFN and why we try to differentiate it from an RFI is this. The fundamental question of a request for needs is we're going to our expert vendors out there and saying, hey, here's our general idea of the project. We're not quite sure how to scope it. We're not quite sure how to do everything perfectly. It might be our first time ever doing this, in fact. So the real goal of the request for needs is to ask those vendors, hey, what do you need to know to put together your best proposal with minimal contingency? Hence the name request for needs. It's all about what do the vendors need is the idea here. So you're having them feed you the information of here's the critical pieces of the scope that must be defined for a proposal to make any sense. And you're getting that feedback from them. And then our goal is to take that information, answer as much as we can. And by definition, we're going to have a pretty effective statement of work. Why? Because it's going to automatically address the key things that your vendors need to know. So therefore, it's pretty good. It's going to get you better pricing, more consistent pricing, better proposals, less guesswork, more tailored to your needs, so on and so forth. So really, that's what the request for needs is doing. It's going out, surveying the vendor community and asking them, what is the critical information you need to know to put together the best proposal with minimal contingency? Now, if that sounds similar to an RFI, it's a little similar. There's some overlap there, but there are some differences and reasons why we come up with a different acronym here. Oftentimes, the vendor community has a pretty poor perception of RFIs. We talked about that in the IT virtual group here, that you a lot of times get vendors who don't want to participate. And then you get to the RFP stage and you're like, wait, I'm getting these proposals and participation from folks who I didn't even know at the RFI stage, or I never heard from them back then. And so there's some challenges with RFIs, and they can kind of have that stinky reputation. So some mistakes that we see with RFIs. Sometimes they'll request trade secrets from vendors, have them try to really put information out there that they don't want to share with their competitors at that point in time. If we're requesting costing, pricing information, now's not the time to do that. We're doing market research. We're not asking for proposals because we don't even know our scope perfectly yet. So how can we get proposals and pricing back? Keep it, don't overdo it here. Asking for what I would say is wrong information, which is either too much information or it's asking the wrong questions. A lot of times questions in RFIs get into capability of the vendor system or the capability and history of what they've done. Can they meet our needs? And that's the wrong question to ask. The better question to ask is, hey, here's our project goals. What specific information will help you, vendor, put together a good proposal? Negative impacts of a traditional RFI that doesn't get into that lane of focusing in like an RFN is trying to do. An RFI that is not well structured, it can increase your time, because it's gonna take you time to hash through it. It increases the amount of resources and efforts to get to your RFP, and a lot of times it's going to give you a big voluminous response of frankly marketing content that's hard to sort through. And so sometimes it doesn't even give you the helpful information that you're hoping to get from it, because vendors want to show the good face of participating, but there's really not much that they want to say or do, and they want to spend as little time as possible. So they'll just throw you the flyers and the handouts and things like that. And usually that doesn't answer your questions of the nuts and bolts of what you're trying to solve on your project. So that's a big problem, is that traditional RFIs have those issues. And then also they're pretty open-ended, right? Hey, vendors, describe your approach to this. Describe your methodology to that. How does your system do X, Y, and Z? Again, wrong questions. These are more proposal questions, not market research questions. And so again, you get the glossy handouts and it becomes a lot of paper, and it's not even giving you the information you're hoping to find. That's the big problem that we see with how RFIs are often done. They're a great tool, but they tend towards that side of things more than we would like, especially when we're working with an internal project team or user group who's not a procurement professional and hasn't seen all these things. They think that they can go out and ask these things and wonderful unicorns and rainbows will come out of it, right? So jumping back to that request for needs, it really can be used in any type of project, any type of service, and it will improve things. It's so targeted. You keep it simple, clean, short, a very brief statement of work and current conditions to lay out just the basics of the project, and then you have your RFN response form next. And that's very simple, the questions you want your vendors to answer. And really there's only two questions. It's, hey, what else do you need to know about our project, and what would help you price things better? And everything else is pretty much a variation off of those two questions. There's a couple ways you can do it. The normal way, the most common way, is to have some type of written approach, right? Where you issue the RFN, request for needs, as a document, and you have written submissions coming back to answer the questions you have asked. And you take that feedback and you use it to enhance your statement of work. Another thing that we've been doing more and more lately is a verbal approach to it. Something, again, that we discussed in the IT breakout group was that vendors just don't want to take the time to participate. They don't like to write things down. And that's particularly true in the IT space. But they will sit down and have a meeting with us. So as long as we set really structured parameters around what that meeting looks like, and here's the information we want to see, it can be very, very effective, and it can be a lot faster. So that's the basics of the request for needs. The ultimate end product is it improves your statement of work. It speeds things up greatly. Some feedback from University of Ottawa, who just did this for both their ERP and large system integrator beyond it. They loved it. They actually did the verbal approach, which went fast, streamlined, got them the information they needed. Statement of work put together, went smoothly. And the other reason to use this RFN tool, why to add it to your toolbox, is the vendors love it. The biggest thing that frustrates vendors is to see an RFP with a statement of work that's unrealistic. So you'll hear it from vendors all the time. I wish the client would have just let us help them scope this out the right way. And you can think of some nefarious incentives there for sure, but really at the end of the day, bottom line, it's just get a somewhat accurate scope, and it makes everything easier. And so the vendors like it, makes you look like a client of choice because you're not wasting their time with the big open-ended request for information process. It's just targeted to, hey, vendors, what do you need to know about our project to put together the best proposal, minimal cost contingency, and that's going to make them happy. So with that, that'll conclude our teaching moment. Thank you for bearing with us on our slight adjustment to the agenda today. Greatly appreciate it.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.